The explosion of the fourth power unit at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is one of the most terrifying man-made disasters in history. But few people know that that night, just a few dozen firefighters, at the cost of incredible effort, stopped a chain reaction that could have made the consequences of the accident fatal for an entire continent. But our story begins 1,000 kilometers away from Chernobyl. When a worker at a nuclear power plant in Sweden was passing through a radiation control frame, a siren suddenly wailed. The cause was a high level of radiation on his shoes. The management decided that a leak had occurred at their own reactor, but everything was normal. Soon, a frightening detail emerged. The radiation level outside was higher than indoors. The radiation was brought from the outside, along with wind and rain. When the data was analyzed, it became clear that something terrible had happened on the territory of the USSR. This is how the whole world found out about what happened in Chernobyl, where 2 days earlier, the pressing of a single button led to a radiation release 400 times greater than the explosion of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. The Soviet Union was forced to urgently evacuate an entire city as a 2,600 square kilometer zone became life-threatening. This is no exaggeration. Simply walking through the forest, a person could receive a lethal dose in just 10 minutes. But there was something else. A secret facility located just 10 kilometers from the station. The station provided electricity for its colossal consumption, and after the explosion, a highly mysterious fate awaited it. April 25th, 1986. It was a warm and sunny day in Pripyat. It was a brand new city with a population of 50,000 people, inhabited mostly by the station's workers and their families. Pripyat was called the City of Youth, as the average age was only 26 years. 3 kilometers away, work was in full swing at the Chernobyl nuclear station. A scheduled experiment was planned for that day. It was supposed to be conducted at 2 p.m., but due to an accident at another power plant, there was a shortage of electricity and it was postponed to the night, when electricity consumption would decrease. After the experiment, the reactor was to be shut down for a major overhaul. Due to this fateful combination of circumstances, the experiment began only at 1:23:04 a.m. on April 26th. From that moment until the tragedy, there were only 43 seconds left. The detonator was the AZ5 button. AZ5 is actually an emergency shutdown button that should instantly shut down the reactor. But due to design flaws and a tragic combination of circumstances that night, it became the detonator. A few seconds after it was pressed, the first explosion thundered, and almost immediately a second one, which was much more powerful. At that moment, one of the firefighters was standing on the street and saw the explosion, so the firefighters responded almost immediately. This fire station was located just a few hundred meters from the power unit, and within 5 minutes of the disaster, the first column of 14 people was at the burning station. The fire department located in Pripyat, about 5 kilometers from the station, also responded to the fire. They arrived in just 7 minutes. What happened was undoubtedly a disaster, but now, if the firefighters do not stop the fire, the situation will become 10 times worse. To understand the scale of what the firefighters faced, let's talk about the station. Inside it, there was not one, but as many as 4 RBMK 1000 reactors. But that's not all. There were plans to build 2 more power units, which would have made Chernobyl nuclear station the most powerful in the world. Just one RBMK reactor is capable of producing 1,000 megawatts of electricity per hour. This would be enough to light up 10 million light bulbs, or fully provide electricity to an entire city with a population of 1 million people. To get the same amount of electricity in a day, one would have to burn approximately 150 rail cars of coal. Its thermal energy would be enough to boil a medium-sized lake in 3 hours. And the station had 4 such reactors. Its dimensions were corresponding. The length of the turbine hall was 600 meters. This is like 2 Eiffel Towers. Such power became one of the main reasons for the construction of one of the USSR's most secret radars, which consumed an enormous amount of energy. It allowed looking beyond the horizon and warning of the launch of ballistic missiles right after their start. In 1986, this Chernobyl station was the flagship of the Soviet nuclear industry, and it was exactly what the firefighters came to extinguish when the reactor exploded in the building of the 4th power unit. The fire itself, although quite strong, was not the main problem for the firefighters. Radiation. That is what posed the greatest threat. Radiation level was so strong that in some places a human received a lethal dose in less than 60 seconds. Needless to say that the radioactive cloud after the explosion killed almost 10 square kilometers of pine forest, which was named the Red Forest and remains radioactive to this day. But the situation at the station was no better. Debris of radioactive graphite straight from the reactor lay scattered around the station and on the roofs. And even though they looked like ordinary black stone debris, if you stood next to them, you would get a lethal dose of radiation in just a couple of minutes. But this was not the scariest part, since in the reactor, besides graphite, there were also 190 tons of nuclear fuel, part of which was also thrown out during the explosion. Often it was several times more radioactive than the graphite. And the most terrifying thing is that it took various forms, from microscopic particles, inhaling which cancer was almost guaranteed, to sharp fragments or even entire fuel assemblies. All of this together led to a monstrous level of radiation at the station. Right after the explosion, the radiation level on the roof of the turbine hall could reach up to 20,000 Roentgens. At such radiational level, a person receives a lethal dose in 90 seconds. Such a radiational background was near the nuclear fuel and pieces of graphite, which having a temperature of over 1,000 degrees, literally melted the roof covered with bitumen and got stuck in it. On the roof of the third power unit and near the ventilation pipe, where there were also fragments of graphite and nuclear fuel, the radiation background could reach up to 15,000 Roentgens right by the pipe, which exceeds the natural background 1 billion times. Being in this zone was so dangerous that later Soviet lunar rovers were used to clear it. The glow above the breach of the fourth reactor itself reached 30,000 Roentgens and higher, and it was exactly in such conditions that the firefighters had to extinguish the fire. But what if this was reported to the firefighters? Alas, they were not told a word about radiation. They were only given a message about a fire on the roof of the third and fourth power units. However, this was not malicious intent. The only available devices at the station had a maximum value of 3.6 Roentgens per hour and immediately went off scale, with values hundreds or thousands of times lower than the actual background radiation. The firefighters were on their way to extinguish an ordinary roof fire. At that moment, they did not yet suspect what they would have to face. And therefore, their equipment and vehicles were standard and absolutely did not protect against radiation in any way. In the future, the liquidators working on the roof stayed there for no more than 90 seconds and had special suits with lead protection that weighed up to 30 kilograms. The firefighters had no protection from radiation whatsoever, and they extinguished the fire for much longer than 90 seconds. Upon arriving at the station, the firefighters saw an unusual fire. A blue glow hung over the station, which came out of the destroyed reactor like a pillar of light. This was ionized air glowing due to colossal radiation. The fourth power unit was engulfed in flames, and what is most terrifying, the fire was spreading. As you remember, there was not one, but 4 RBMK reactors at the station, and the remaining 3 continued to work at full power. If the fire had spread to the third power unit, which was in the same building with the exploded fourth, it could have damaged the control cables and the reactor's cooling system, which could have led to another explosion. But that is not all. The roof of the turbine hall was actively burning. Red-hot graphite was literally burning through it. The turbine hall was common to all 4 reactors, and inside it stood turbines with tons of oil and generators that were cooled by hydrogen. If the roof collapsed and the fire engulfed the entire turbine hall, it would have led to a fire of tons of oil, as well as explosions caused by hydrogen. The fire would have become many times stronger. But what is most terrifying, it could have led to the failure of the pumps pumping water not only through the third, but also through the remote first and second blocks. In this scenario, control over the station would have been completely lost, and the scenario of the fourth reactor could have repeated itself on all 3 remaining ones. This would truly have been a global catastrophe, and not only because the radiation emissions would have been many times greater, it would have been almost impossible to liquidate such a disaster. If the accident at the fourth power unit was managed by dropping boron and sand into the reactor, and subsequently covering it to isolate it from the environment, then with the explosion of 4 reactors, this could not be done. The radiation level simply would not have allowed pilots to fly to the station and workers to approach it to carry out work. All of this could lead to a 10-fold increase in the exclusion zone, the complete evacuation of Kyiv with a population of 2.5 million people, And if there was contamination of groundwater, for the water system of a huge part of Eurasia, it would have meant a death sentence. To stop this chain reaction, the firefighters needed to perform a heroic deed and extinguish the fire, working under inhuman doses of radiation. The firefighters understood the danger too. Immediately after arrival, Lieutenant Pravik assessed the scale of the catastrophe and transmitted "Call number 3" over the radio, the signal for the highest category of fire danger. 2 critical zones along which the fire could spread were identified. The roof of the turbine hall, where the first group led by Lieutenant Pravik began extinguishing the fire, and the roof of the third block, which the second group extinguished at a height of 70 meters, led by Lieutenant Kibanok. The firefighters were not extinguishing the exploded reactor itself. They were extinguishing the fire that could destroy the entire station. Not only were the radiation levels off the charts, but the roofs were covered with bitumen, and from the red-hot graphite, it melted and turned into scorching tar. Every step was taken with great difficulty as their feet literally stuck to the roof. Pieces of graphite that hindered the extinguishing were often thrown away with hands and feet, which led to radiation burns. Less than 30 minutes after starting the fight against the fire, many firefighters on the roof began to experience nausea, dizziness, and severe redness of the face. Some lost consciousness right at their combat posts. By that time, the first backup arrives to extinguish the fire. Throughout the night, more and more forces will be drawn in to help the firefighters. Less than an hour later, as a result of the skillful and selfless actions of the firefighters, the largest fire hotspots on the roof of the turbine hall were extinguished. A little later, they managed to localize the main fire hotspots on the roof of the third power unit. There was no talk of completely extinguishing the fire yet. The primary task was to stop its spread, to eliminate the largest hotspots. About an hour after the start of extinguishing the fire, Lieutenant Pravik, Lieutenant Kibanok, as well as several other firefighters who fought the fire on the roof, were sent to the hospital with ultra-acute radiation sickness. A few hours later, the entire personnel of the first 2 guards was replaced. To replace the first arriving firefighters, starting from 3 to 4 a.m., large reserve forces from neighboring cities began to massively converge at the burning reactor. The arrived fresh fighters climbed onto the roofs and methodically took over the hoses from the exhausted firefighters of VPCH-2 and SVPCH-6. By 4 a.m., several hundred people and dozens of units of equipment were already concentrated in the vicinity of the station. At about 5 a.m., work began to shut down the third power unit, and by 6 a.m., the fire at the station was extinguished. That night, the firefighters did not just eliminate the consequences of the explosion of the fourth power unit, they, without exaggeration, saved a whole continent from a tragedy of a global scale. Unfortunately for some, this heroic deed cost their lives. 6 firefighters who worked in the most dangerous zones, where fragments of graphite and fuel were located, passed away 2 to 3 weeks after the accident. Lieutenant Pravik and Lieutenant Kibanok passed away on May 11th. But the myth that all the firefighters died in the first days does not correspond to reality. The firefighters who ensured the water supply, worked in slightly less radioactive areas, or were in the vehicles, also received severe radiation injuries, but survived. Most of the 28 firefighters survived acute radiation sickness and lived for years or decades more, but the damage to their health was still irreparable. Despite the fact that the destruction of the 3 remaining reactors was avoided, the consequences were terrible. On April 27th, the evacuation of Pripyat began. To transport out the 50,000 city, over 1,200 buses were brought in. In the 30-kilometer zone near the station, human residence was prohibited. In total, approximately 300,000 people had to be resettled from the contaminated zones. The radioactive emissions were colossal and were approximately equal to 400 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima. Thousands of units of equipment were abandoned in radioactive graveyards: helicopters, tanks, fire trucks. The unique and most important strategic facility, Duga, which could see enemies' rockets over the horizon, became impossible to operate. The strongest radiation levels caused serious damage to the electronics, but the radar itself survived to this day. It stands in the middle of the forest, almost unchanged. The economic damage was colossal. Chernobyl became the most expensive man-made disaster in history. It is impossible to name the exact amount of damage from the explosion. Theoretically, it varies from $700 to $900 billion in today's money. For comparison, The cost of the ISS is $150 billion.